For joining us. I am Ryan Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association, and we're joined this evening by Mac Haddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the AKA. We called this meeting tonight to provide you with the latest news and discuss, amongst others, the new kratom regulation announced in Indonesia, the Bloomberg mini documentary, Representative Castor of Florida, and the upcoming introduction of our new Veterans Advocacy Program. Our Q&A is now open, and I will turn it over to Mac.
Thank you. And let me first thank everyone for joining us. And for those that either are on now or watch this later on the video, I had an interesting discussion with a Bloomberg News reporter earlier today. And Bloomberg has obviously stepped up its interest in kratom. We've seen their documentary that came out, which I think had very mixed messages, some that I didn't like, and I think were unfair, some parts of it. But others were good and advanced the understanding about kratom. And then, of course, they did what I thought was a very balanced article, somewhat tainted, about the FDA's dose finding study. And of course, they had to take their little shot about how it didn't include some problematic liquid drinks. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But this reporter was doing more of a background piece, and she was questioning me about how it was that in 2016 that this group of ragtag advocates were able to turn around a scheduling recommendation that had been made by the FDA and that was implemented by the Drug Enforcement Administration. And as everyone now knows, the historic decision of having the DEA withdraw for the first time in the history of 80 plus recommendations that have been made for previous substances under that section of the Controlled Substances Act. And I was able to relate this to this reporter that one of the primary reasons for that withdrawal occurring was because of the passion of the kratom community. Kratom advocates who used kratom, that understood that it was safe and that it had some benefits for them and their health and well-being, which under this Constitution, they have the right to make those decisions. And she pushed back a little bit on me and said, the advocates are up there on Capitol Hill all the time, really trying to advocate for one thing or another. You would have to admit that this was a fairly unique situation. And I agree it was. It was a miraculous kind of decision that was made by thousands upon thousands of kratom advocates. And I reminded her that there were 147,000 petition signers opposing the ban on the We the People platform that is maintained by the White House. That was an extraordinary number of advocates. And then, of course, we had thousands and thousands of phone calls that went to the DEA. We had thousands upon thousands of emails that went to members of Congress, which drove them a significant number in a very short period of time to actually push back on the DEA. And we got that historic decision, which remains to this day the single time that a scheduling recommendation has been withdrawn by the DEA based on an outcry from constituents. Since then, and I told her this, that we continue to have these advocates who are willing to serve their community with service in the form of showing up at meetings for us, at hearings, and at events that help us tell the kratom story. Because as much as I am able and take advantage of the opportunity to talk about the policy side of this, what moves the needle with legislators and public policymakers is to hear the impassioned pleas of kratom consumers who are able to articulate in a very specific way how kratom has improved the quality of their lives or even saved their lives. So we're grateful for that. We see some extraordinary advocates who are willing to pitch in on specific requests that we've made just in the last several months to help us in sending that message at champ shows, at the National Conference of State Legislature meetings. We've got an upcoming congressional briefing that I'll talk about here in a little while that is going to highlight some of those voices that are so important and have become the hallmark of the success of our efforts in preserving legal access to kratom, safe kratom products in the United States today. So again, thank you to all of you. I'm enormously grateful. The American Kratom Association relies upon you. We obviously honor you for all of the work that you do, and we don't say enough how important what you do and how appreciated you are for those that step up and take a leadership role in doing so. So first, I want to talk about the Indonesian regulations that the Indonesian government has recently implemented. We are now in a review period of those regulations, despite the fact that they are in place now. Anyone who tells you that there's any kind of a honeymoon period, it's not true. We have some deep concerns at the American Kratom Association about some of the provisions of these regulations because, frankly, they weren't shared with us, despite the fact that we're in Indonesia with a significant delegation. Everybody was close to the vest there about what these specific provisions were. And so we obviously have some concerns about them. And by the way, just as an administrative matter, if you have questions, please enter them in the button at the bottom where you have Q&A, and we'll get to those questions before we conclude tonight and answer them for you. But essentially, some of the key provisions of the Indonesian regulations will result in price increases on kratom products in the United States, some of which are justified because they accomplish two important objectives that the American Kratom Association definitely supports. First is that one of the provisions of this regulation will provide what I like to call a minimum wage for those kratom farmers who are largely indigent families living in remote areas of Indonesia who are the lifeline for kratom raw materials being harvested and processed in order to get them to milling operations prior to their being exported to the United States. That increase and a stable minimum wage for them will ensure that they can have an existence that is reliable in terms of their income as they go forward. Now, I think that there are some caveats to that we'll discuss here in just a minute, but we welcome this minimum wage for them. It will start at $3 a kilo. It averages today less than $1.50 a kilo. It will also graduate over time to $4 a kilo. And then there's an increase for the quality of the metrogenine that they're able to harvest, which will encourage them to wait for the appropriate time to harvest rather than doing it a little too quickly when the metrogenine content of the kratom plants are not as high. So that's a positive thing. The second cost increase, and again, we support it, is that in order for the government to implement this new regulatory plan, it obviously is going to cost funds to do it. There's a fiscal note that is associated with it. And so the government has proposed that they will collect on each kilo of kratom that is exported from Indonesia will include a tariff. This is common for countries to do this. We understand that it should be done. And as long as those tariffs are not onerous and they don't constitute a taking of the ability of the kratom processors in order to export kratom raw materials, we support it. That will lead to a price increase for kratom consumers in the United States and highlights the importance of kratom consumers being very careful about purchasing kratom products based on price alone, because these regulations will ensure a couple of things: quality kratom raw materials, well-tested materials before they leave Indonesia, which are part of the funding provided by the tariffs, where the raw materials will be tested for contaminants and any adulterants. And that's an important quality step that will be invaluable for us in presenting to the Food and Drug Administration a system that is committed to the wholesomeness of kratom raw materials that meet or exceed FDA standards as they go forward here in the United States. So we welcome this. We think it's an important step forward in this regard. Now, the other thing that several things these regulations do. First, they impose a quality standard that is required for the export of the raw materials, and that will mean that they have to have the capacity to not only process these materials, making certain that they are free from contaminants, which means they have to use food-grade machines, which are sterilized, which are stainless steel, and I fear that they do not currently have the export capacity to meet demand here in the United States. Now, there are people in Indonesia that dispute that and say, no, we'll be able to meet the demand. I don't think that they've rationally thought through this at this point, nor have they pressure tested that claim. And so it will be important to be able to process enough material that is collected from the farmers to make sure that the system works properly. But if there becomes a backlog of this material because there's not a processing capacity by the qualified licensed processors, and I'm told that the government initially, at least for the first 6 months, will probably license no more than 6 of these processors, milling operations. And I don't think that meets the demand. And we're going to watch this closely. We're going to test whether or not the claims made by the Indonesian processors over there pass muster, because it is important to ensure that that quality of the raw materials are there. And if you develop a huge backlog, 2 things will happen. Farmers will not get paid because they're not going to need much of the kratom raw material. So even though you've boosted the price, if you purchase less, the effect is the same in terms of disadvantaging those farmers and their families. And if you have too big of a backlog, it creates a black market where people will work around that system, and that increases the threat of contaminated raw materials being shipped into the United States as we go forward. So we're concerned about the regulations not having a phase-in period that would allow for a more effective way of merely lab testing the materials prior to export, rather than restricting the number of processors, and thereby restricting the capacity that they can generate of quality raw materials that are free from contamination. They're still going to do testing, by the way, and I think that's an important step in order to validate what the processors are doing. They also have imposed a limit on crushed leaves and crumbs being exported. The target for that limitation on crushed leaves and crumbs, as opposed to processed powder, is they're targeting the extract industry. That is a mistake, because most of the marketing of kratom products in the United States is focused on extract products. I am not talking about highly concentrated and dangerous products. I'm talking about extracts that are recognized in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act as common in the dietary supplement space, that are extracted using food-grade solvents under processes that are approved by international standards that produce safe materials. That's the kind of extract material that I'm talking about. And too often we conflate an extract material as somehow being dangerous when it's compared to a highly concentrated and products that should not be formulated in that way, that would in fact present a threat to consumers. So when I talk about extracts, it's important to note that we're talking about those that are processed correctly using food-grade solvents approved by the FDA for that purpose. But the Indonesian government has said that they will not allow any export of crushed leaves or crumbs, which means 2 things will happen. In order to do extraction methodology for products like that, you would have to consume a significant amount of powdered kratom material if you eliminate crushed leaves and crumbs. And that's because in order for the solvents to work effectively, to extract the metrogenine, you have to have a larger surface area, or it becomes largely inefficient. And unfortunately, as it stands now, this limitation on crushed leaves and crumbs that currently exists right now are going to be burdensome, and I think overly restrictive, and potentially going to create a real problem, because it will consume much of the powdered material, which will again shrink the supply, drive up demand, and increase cost unnecessarily along the way. So we should be prepared for that. There also are regulations, as we understand them, that will limit the amount of processed raw material that can be shipped from exporters that are registered with the government based on a pre-qualification procedure, meaning that they will limit the amount to a purchase order that is provided by the processor. Well, that doesn't work very well when you have a lot of the processing that goes on now and the shipping and exporting out of Indonesia that arrives in the United States in warehouses here, and there they await the purchase orders. So you create a lag in the marketplace that demands a purchase order up front. And then if the processor produces, effectively processes and sends and exports that material, then they could apply for additional export capacity and quantities based on purchase orders. And so you reward the big players in the industry, and you significantly disadvantage the smaller players because they're not going to be offering purchase orders for large volumes, and you will have the large vendors overwhelm the small guys. That's just simply unfair and not very well thought out when it comes to the way that the regulation should actually work in order to support a robust American kratom marketplace. We are told that we'll have 6 months of this burn-in period before any changes can be made to this regulation. We're going to be working with manufacturers here in the United States to ask them to build up a grassroots campaign in Indonesia with their kratom suppliers, many of whom likely will be eliminated in this process, at least for the short term, because they're restricting the number of licenses that are going to be granted under the current process for export. We're very concerned about all of those elements of this. At the end of the day, what we hope will be true is that you will have a system that protects the farmers. And currently, just so everyone knows, the way the system has disadvantaged the farmers is that because of the import alert, it is a high risk endeavor to purchase kratom raw materials from farmers, and then for the processor or the broker that purchases those raw materials to take all of the risk of getting the raw materials exported to the United States through customs and then into a processor who will only pay for it if they've tested it to be free from contaminants and it actually arrives at their manufacturing facility. And so that has forced a system that pays the farmer a reduced amount because the risks are assumed by the brokers or the processors, and it is unfair to the farmers. And understanding the way trade commodity practices work, this is an anomaly created completely and totally by the FDA's import alert. That import alert has to go, and there's a plan that we have for it. But I'll tell you the one fallacy that the Indonesian government officials, however well-intentioned their efforts in formulating this regulation and where they missed the boat. They believe that if they were to produce a system that guarantees that kratom exported raw materials from Indonesia will be fully tested for contaminants that will only be processed by GMP qualified processors that use stainless steel food grade equipment that reduces the potential for contamination. And if they can prove it with a test, they believe, the Indonesian officials believe, and they stated it to me, that the FDA will withdraw its import alert. That is not true. The FDA uses the import alert as a ruse in order to execute their effort to ban kratom raw materials and kratom products in the United States. Their theory is they can abuse their import alert authority granted to them by Congress in order to allow to stop the importation of raw materials as a de facto ban. That's what they want, and it has nothing to do with the quality of those raw materials coming into the United States. In fact, the Indonesian government has done an excellent job certainly in controlling the contamination of raw materials, because the last known outbreak of Salmonella or E. coli occurred in the United States associated with kratom raw materials in 2018. There hasn't been another one since, but you can see every week that there are outbreaks of Salmonella and E. coli on a number of produce and meat products that are coming into the United States. And it's common for these kinds of products for that to happen, and lots of different sources. And none of those outbreaks of Salmonella or E. coli result in the FDA calling for a ban on the products that are subjected to that scrutiny along the way. It is unfair to kratom, and we've known that that's the hand that we're dealt with the FDA, so we simply have to deal with it. We are pledging, and I have committed to the Indonesian government that the American Kratom Association will continue to be a good partner. And that means that we're going to provide recommendations for improving their systems. We're going to do so. We're going to tell them when we disagree, and I have. In fact, when I spoke to the Minister of Trade, he was shocked that the American Kratom Association had raised the concerns that we identified, that I just articulated with you, because he believed that the American Kratom Association had endorsed these regulations. We had not even been presented with the opportunity to review them prior to their enactment. And while we conceptually understood that they were doing these regulations, we had no idea of the specific provisions that I've discussed with you here that obviously are problematic as we go forward. So that being said, we have a few months where there's going to be turbulence in the marketplace. It is guaranteed that that's going to happen. We hope that it'll smooth out with some negotiations that are ongoing. We hope that there will be a carve out for some of these raw materials so that we don't have these shortages that are anticipated, and that we can develop a alternative workaround, at least for the first several months, so that we can make sure that the needs of the American consumer, and globally, by the way, because this impacts them going forward. Let me just finish by saying, what the theory is behind the crushed leaves and crumbs that are necessary for the extract products and the extraction methodology for that. There is a clear bias in Indonesia about extract products, and that is because it is illegal right now in Indonesia to extract kratom raw materials into extract raw materials. And so there's no economic incentive. And in fact, the limitation they placed on the crushed leaves and the crumbs put in a size limitation based on a mesh size for which the material could fall through the mesh, that simply added a requirement that allowed for Indonesian processors to have control of the crumbs and crushed leaf material, so that they could be a part of the financial transaction that's going on. We hope that we can relieve that issue as well. We think it's very important for that to happen. And so we will keep you posted as we go forward on that. I'm going to pause for just a minute and see if there are issues or questions about the Indonesian situation. I'm going to scan through them real quickly. Well, here's a good question. What is the opinion of Thai kratom and the upcoming boom of imports? Thailand seems to have better tasted in harvesting practices. So this is a great question, because there are some reports that I've received that there are some processes that the Thai manufacturers of kratom are using that are different from Indonesia in terms of the drying process, and that may account for some of the taste of Thai material. But what is important is that when you see an increase in the price driven by a floor price or a minimum wage for farmers and the tariffs, it makes Indonesian kratom raw materials more expensive and makes Thai raw materials more competitive. And so that, I think that's healthy, by the way, but it certainly won't be something the Indonesian farmers want to hear about, that these regulations delivered an unforeseen and unanticipated consequence that you may have more competition in the marketplace with Thai products. But I've heard this repeatedly, that the Thai kratom seems to taste better and goes down better. So we'll see. Kim asked the question, beside Indonesia, what other countries are exporting kratom to the U.S. market? What is the outlook that these other countries will implement similar legislation as in Indonesia did? First, Thailand has already done so. They have a very tightly controlled marketplace, but they're actually doing the traceability of the raw materials, which is a key element that the FDA likes to see in a balls and strikes environment. If they were just looking at protecting kratom raw materials, if the FDA were just doing that, they would welcome that traceability part of it. And the Indonesian, while it's not part of the regulations, the Indonesian growers are developing a similar system. In fact, I just got their program. It's called Sapori, and if I can get it up there. So Sapori is their process to do a computerized system to track the kratom leaves back to the farm and to the tree where they originate. So I think that's a good thing, but that's already being done in Thailand. I think that there are other countries where kratom is being grown. There are new plantations being developed, and I think they've come online in Africa. And so there's another potential competitive marketplace. Depends on how it's done. But this is a situation of following the money. And in some cases, the incentive for increased profits or increased pricing can overwhelm good sense. And there's a balance here, and we want to help them maintain that balance as we go forward. So I think that's terrific. Jeff says, sounds like a lot of moving parts for relatively unsophisticated farmers. They are unsophisticated. They are poor families. They live in remote regions where the trees grow ubiquitously. It is an economic opportunity for them. It doesn't mean that they have the sophistication that is required to be business people, and that allows for them to be, frankly, abused along the way. And that's why I think it's a good thing that you put in this minimum price as a minimum wage, because I think it'll protect them along the way. And I think that that's very important, and we support it. But it does have consequences as we go forward. So we'll see how that develops. Jennifer says, does it mean the farmers are being knocked out by tariffs, giving larger companies to get control and buy from small farmers, than charging more from us and giving them less for the product? So here's the way it works. There no longer will be an opportunity for a farmer to sell their kratom raw materials to anyone who shows up and says, I'll buy it. It has to be sold to a qualified registered processor. That's the only way the kratom raw materials are going to be exported out of Indonesia. So there won't be this opportunity to shop around. And in fact, they will have very limited opportunities. But the exchange for that is that they get a guaranteed price of $3 a kilo to start out, goes to $4, I think, within a year. So that's the trade-off. And again, a little difficult to figure that out, but they will suffer from a chokehold or a tourniquet that's devised by the qualified raw material manufacturers if they cannot process it with the available equipment. And that's the real question today is, does the existing capacity have the kind of throughput that allows for the market globally to be served? And I don't think it does. Based on the visit that we just had there, there's not enough online processing facilities that meet FDA quality standards that can meet the demand. And that's the concern that I've got. So we will see how that works. John asked what the realistic timetable for reversing the FDA import alert, whether through legislation or litigation. We are going to refile the federal KCPA, which will provide that the import alert gets lifted, directs the FDA to lift it. But there is a very interesting thing that happened when the Supreme Court ruled in a completely separate issue called the Chevron case, which essentially says that the federal judges no longer are compelled to rely upon the interpretation of the federal agency of the statute when there's any ambiguity. Now, the agency's burden of proof in a federal court of law will be that their interpretation is correct and based on good science. It is a great opportunity for the import alert to be challenged, and we're working with our legal teams and in cooperation with some of the importers to see if we can put together a case that will challenge the import alert going forward. And I think that's important. The pressure of the Indonesian regulations will be important, not just to the FDA, and I think, frankly, the FDA is going to ignore them, but they will be important to the Department of Commerce and to the Department of State and to the Congressional Foreign Policy Committees, all of whom have a much larger role to play in this foreign policy universe, where they want to develop a foreign policy program that offsets the influence that the Chinese government is trying to exert in Indonesia financially and socially. And so for example, the Chinese government has come in and said, we will help you burn down the kratom forests, the rainforest where kratom trees grow, and we'll help you build palm oil plantations, because there is a huge demand by Chinese processors to feed a growing demand for palm oil, which is used in food products around the globe. And so it is in the United States' interest to offset that influence. And if the FDA is prosecuting their own petty battle about wanting to ban kratom using the import alert process and abusing it, I should say, then I think these other agencies and Congress can weigh in and say, enough of the nonsense, enough of the petty childish behavior. We now got to do the right thing in order to maintain a consistent foreign policy. And so the Indonesian government is now working will be working with the AKA and these other agencies in the federal government in order to deliver that message. Michael Fasano asked, is the BNN still pursuing any Indonesian ban? In a meeting last year that we were invited to participate in, General Muldoko, the Chief of Staff to President Jokowi, convened all stakeholders meeting and included the BNN. They were given a substantial amount of time to make their presentation. General Muldoko then invited the scientists that were there from the United States and the American Kratom Association to make our case. We were given an adequate amount of time to do that. And at the end, General Muldoko said that he was persuaded by the scientists. And by the way, the Indonesian BRIN, which is their equivalent of the National Institutes on Health, a research-based organization, and their Ministry of Health both weighed in on our side. And so General Muldoko said that the policy of the Indonesian government would be that kratom would be treated as a medicinal herb and that the BNN would not be allowed to implement their proposed ban. Now, that doesn't mean the BNN is not continuing to pursue their efforts to get kratom banned. They're doing it at the ASEAN group because they're the Indonesian's representative, and we're talking to the Indonesian government about that problem. So they're continuing to do it. Brian asked, what is the status of fair trade negotiation with the Copra Brew Group? I'm going to be as delicate as I can be. Copra Brew is a small cog in a very large machine over in Indonesia. They are one of about 9 or 10 of the growers groups. We dealt in good faith from the American Kratom Association with Copra Brew and the leader of Copra Brew in Indonesia. And what we discovered was that there was a lack of integrity in the pronouncements and statements that were made by the Copra Brew leaders about what their role in the actual production of kratom raw materials were being sold and exported to the United States for sale. And it became an irresolvable conflict because you couldn't depend on anything that was being said. And every time they were challenged, the story changed. And so I will respect anyone who wants to keep kratom legal. Copra Brew actually proposed last year to the Indonesian government that all kratom exports to the United States should be terminated until they developed a system that benefited them. And that's self-serving. It's frankly a financial incentive that overcame good sense. And so I can tell you my perspective, my opinion, that until Copra Brew wants to come into the family of responsible people that want to do this, then I don't think that they've earned a seat at the table at this point. Now, I'm not disrespecting the perspective that they have in terms of their so-called fair trade negotiation. Their fair trade status was far more onerous than giving a minimum wage to the farmers. They wanted to set the price going out of Indonesia. And that was for the benefit not of the farmers, but rather of the processors. And to me, price fixing like that has no place in a free enterprise system. As it is, we have to accommodate a tainted system that the import alert has imposed on them. But the solution is not to go into these price fixing things. I respect that the leader of the Copra Brew Group, Johannes, can have a different viewpoint. But in front of many witnesses, he misrepresented and he changed his story consistently when challenged, where to the point that there was no reliability to anything that was said. So that's why the current status of the Copra Brew discussions. And I understand that the Copra Brew has a group of followers in the United States who are working with them in business relationships to franchise kratom sales in the individual states. I know and respect several of those people that are working with them. Paul Kemp's an example. Paul is a tremendous kratom advocate, and I respect him beyond belief. But people can be wrong, just as I can be wrong, by the way. But in this case, the evidence is clear that the Copra Brew Group tried to overstate and overplay their role along the way. So I am much more encouraged by the other 8 groups or 9 groups, however many there are right now, having fidelity to the goal going forward. So if I've stepped on the toes of the Copra Brew Group, I apologize. I didn't intend to do that. I wanted to simply state the position. Daniel Torres, who is one of the Copra Brew leaders in the United States, sits behind a keyboard and he asks these questions. He claims to ask questions, but he's taking pot shots at me and the AKA. And I invited him to come on a webinar like this one, and we could have a fair debate. He has declined. And I just don't think, he said, well, he'll meet with me one-on-one. Why would I do that? What good would come from having a sit-down session one-on-one to consume time to do that when the real issues are the ones that he identifies when he sits behind that keyboard and puts up on social media platforms? I just don't think that's the right way to do things. And I think we ought to be transparent and open book. I want to be that. And so I went on a podcast just last weekend, and you can go watch it, where we talked about this, but Daniel Torres refused. He's part of the Copra Brew Group. So I hope we can find a way to negotiate and work together. where we have common goals. And I hope that they will understand that there is a far better process that protects not only the farmers in Indonesia, but also protects consumers in the United States. And we don't have these intervening money issues that are purely price controls that harm everyone in that process. And that's what Koperbu was at least advocating last year when we met with them in Indonesia. So that's where we stand on that issue right now. Nicholas asks, are many of the kratom powder products from Southeast Asia generally organic and made without pesticides? Is there anything that can be changed in the nutrient and alkaloid profile of kratom leaves? This is an interesting but complex question. Most of the kratom raw materials that are produced in Indonesia do not have the benefit of any pesticides because they're not needed. There may be some plantations where there are specific local problems with pests, and maybe that's going to happen, but it certainly doesn't need to be done now. In the drying process, it's a little different problem. You don't need pesticides. You need to make sure you use drying sheds rather than laying it out on the ground where any pest can walk through it, and of course have problems with that. So I have been impressed with the improvements in the Indonesian farmer operations where they harvest the leaves, they dry them, mostly appropriately now. They didn't 4 years ago, I can tell you that, but they've made substantial progress, and I certainly applaud them for that effort. And they are all organic, by the way. There are issues where some farmers add non-kratom leafy material to make it look like kratom to bulk up the volume because they're putting tapioca and stems and that kind of thing. That just happens. And certainly these new regulations will help to weed out those bad actors as they go forward. But this is just the nature of the beast, partly because of the economics that are involved in it. And I think that that this is a matter where right now the farmers, I think, are going to be incentivized to be more careful. And certainly the regulations will screen out any of these add-on organic materials that are not kratom being added to it. Lloyd asked, I was wondering when China would get involved with this. I had heard China was getting involved destroying the forest in other countries in Africa for palm plantation also, and in Indonesia, surprised they don't have their hands in the kratom processing. For whatever reason, China hasn't shown an interest in it because to them, the economic value is in palm oil. They're willing to encourage and help facilitate the deforestation of the Borneo rainforest in order to clear the land for palm oil plantations. And the way they do deforestation is they burn the forest down. There was a significant deforestation effort in 2016 that resulted in over 3,000 deaths because of the pollution that got generated, because of the poor way that they did it. And it actually then resulted in the U.S. government and ASEAN nations forming a compact about the environment that would hopefully prevent that kind of catastrophe from happening again. But the Chinese are interested in one thing, and that's the dollar. And so we'll have to watch and see how that develops along the way. So we're working hard on developing that. So I'm going to stop on Indonesia for the moment. I hope I've given you a good background on it. I again extend the invitation on the Koperbu issue for a responsible discussion. And it's certainly not going to be with someone who has demonstrably over time consistently been inconsistent in the way that they approach it, and has been, arguably, I think, having a lack of integrity about what the role that individual plays in the actual kratom marketplace through Koperbu. So let's move on to the 2025 plan for KCPA legislation. And let's start first with the federal legislation. We are going to be redrafting the federal KCPA to try to accommodate some of the issues that the Food and Drug Administration has articulated over the past year and a half. And we're in the process of developing that. Many of you may have seen the report that Representative Cantor from Florida, who is largely using the Tampa Bay Times Deadly Dose article in order to attack the kratom industry. And I'll tell you something, a very interesting anecdote about that story. Many of you that read that story may have noticed that the Tampa Bay Times attributed to medical examiners in the state of Florida 46 deaths that were directly result of kratom only, or largely because of kratom. They waffled a little bit. They published the methodology that they used, describing how they collected the data, the autopsies and tox reports on those 46 deaths. They had to describe that because in Florida, there's no central repository or collection area for autopsies and tox screens on deaths. So they went to the 20 plus divisions of medical examiners in Florida, and they described in some detail how they did this. So we replicated that. There is an outstanding member of the AKA staff who spent several months FOIAing the medical examiner districts, recreating and specifically asking those medical examiner districts to give us the same death reports that have been given to the Tampa Bay Times. At the end of that process, we have 51 reported deaths that we think are part of the universe of the 46 that the Tampa Bay Times reported on. So I reached out to the Tampa Bay Times reporters and I said to them, in order to make certain that we are talking apples to apples, we will give you the names and the case numbers of the deaths that we have, and we would like you to tell us which ones you didn't include in your database. They rejected that. They said, oh, we're not going to co-author a journalistic article with you. Well, we're not interested in doing journalism. We're interested in publishing a report about the truth, and they don't want to know the truth. And that's unfortunate because that's where we are right now with the Tampa Bay Times. So what we're going to do is proceed with the evaluation of all of the deaths. But here's the interesting top level report and outcome of that. What we found is that the claim made by the Tampa Bay Times and upon which Representative Cantor relies is false. Those deaths are not kratom only. In fact, in some cases that are reported as kratom only, we found that the request from the medical examiner to the outside laboratories requested that they only test for metrogene. And guess what? The only tox screen that came back was for a level of metrogene. We also found that the levels of metrogene attributed to cause of kratom death were far under what even my personal opinion, the NMS labs, which is the leading forensic toxicology lab in the country, I think they're pretty anti-kratom. And they came back and published a peer-reviewed article that said that anything under 1,000 nanograms per milliliter in a death report is not a kratom death. And the vast majority of the 46 deaths were under that level. There is no basis for any medical examiner, and certainly not the Tampa Bay Times, with their yellow journalism to publish a report in a conclusion that is simply not based on facts. But yet Representative Cantor believes it because we would like to believe that when a news outlet publishes a report that it's accurate. Now, the Tampa Bay Times has an option here. They could say, Mac Haddo, you're wrong. And it's okay, let's complete or compare, I should say, the two cases, the case documents. Let's make sure we're talking the same things, and then let's look at each one of them, and let's have an independent forensic toxicologist examine them. Let's see who's telling the truth. I made the offer for them to get the blood samples of every one of those deaths, send them to a lab of their choice, and we would pay for it, and they said no. This is not a journalistic effort by them. It is a hit job. And I would ask everyone to go back and look closely at that article. Look at the targeted companies that they went after and ask yourself, who isn't on this list? Who isn't on the list that has a class action lawsuit against them? Who isn't on this list that has product liability cases against them? I think that's telling, and you ought to take a look at it because it's certainly informative to me about who the instigators are and perhaps who is behind that Tampa Bay Times article, because it certainly isn't good journalism, and we're going to continue to pursue this because we want the truth. And the victims of bad information, as published in the Tampa Bay Times, are the families, because they have a right to know what the truth is. And obviously, this is instigated by the trial attorneys who want to keep feeding this pipeline of disinformation about kratom. And then the other victim of it is the truth. All of you may have heard, I hope you have, that the AKA sued the two medical examiners in Ohio for their claims that kratom caused the death of a young man. And when we settled that case, it was settled on the basis that these two medical examiners agreed. Now, their off-ramp was they said they reviewed new literature. There was no new literature, but that was their way they explained it. So they then changed the cause of death from metrogene intoxication to undetermined, based on the fact that new literature contradicts the basis upon which they did it. They didn't share with anyone that when they requested the tox screen from NMS Labs, the only thing in that Ohio case that they asked the NMS Labs to test for was metrogene. And then they said it was a metrogeny death. This is what happens. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse scientist who appears in one of the recent documentaries, Mysteries of Kratom, and she's interviewed, and she says this is one of the problems that we have where medical examiners don't have any standardized postmortem regulations about how you come to a conclusion about a death. Carl Williams, the former chief medical examiner in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, recently retired, castigated his fellow medical examiners for drawing conclusions that are not supported by scientific evidence. This is the problem we have, and there really needs to be a corrective action taken by the National Association of Medical Examiners to put into place the kind of standard postmortem methodology testing that is required. That was, in fact, recommended by the Centers for Disease Control when they evaluated so-called reported deaths attributable to kratom submitted by medical examiners and coroners. And they said there's no consistency on this, and therefore there's no reliability that can be relied upon. And yet, when you look at the complaints filed by trial attorneys across the country, what do? They point to the CDC report. They point to medical examiners drawing these conclusions. They point to the FDA saying that kratom is dangerous, none of which is past the rigorous scientific test requirements that you would think that good jurisprudence is based on. So I think that is where we are. So on the federal side, we're going to revamp it. We do have a congressional briefing that's coming up on Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It will be live streamed on YouTube, and you should watch your emails or social media postings, and you'll see how you can link to watch this. We will have Dr. Chris McCurdy from the University of Florida, Dr. Kirsten Smith from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Ed Boyer from Ohio State University, and a visiting professor from Harvard Medical School, and Dr. Jack Henningfield from Johns Hopkins University, testifying and presenting an update on kratom science. And NIDA director, Dr. Nora Volko, will be submitting written testimony because she's traveling on Friday and not available to attend in person. We will also have some constituents, kratom consumers, two that are specifically focused on the sponsors, the co-sponsors on the House side. We will have a representative, Melody Wolf from Michigan, and she's represented by Congressman Jack Bergman, and then Heidi Sikora from Wisconsin, represented by Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. And then we'll have some veteran representatives, the Forgotten Not Gone group, the Guidrys are going to testify, and Michael Krawitz, who's from the Veterans Cannabis Medical Cannabis Group. And we think that this update is going to move the needle in preparing staff members and members of Congress for the revised federal KCPA in 2025. We also have a very robust plan for state legislation that will be coming up in 2025. We still have a couple of states that are outliers here at the end of the legislative sessions. We don't anticipate there'll be any great movement there, but it's something that we hope for, but certainly sets the stage for 2025. I'm guessing we're going to have nearly 30 states where we're going to be actively lobbying. Now, this is a resource question, and we have to rely upon you and upon vendors who are willing to contribute to our lobbying efforts in order to make sure that kratom is legal in the states, well regulated, properly labeled, and restricted for minors. So we may not be able to do everything we would like to do. There's some additional issues that have arisen. One of which a commitment by the Global Kratom Coalition that they're going to go back to the 13 states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and they're going to advocate in those states for what they call the drug-like regulatory scheme as opposed to the self-regulatory scheme, which is what we advocate for and which is in place at the federal and at state levels for dietary supplements. We think that's a bad mistake, but we may have to start defending that, and that, of course, will drain resources away from what we think are positive efforts going forward. We hope that the Global Kratom Coalition will reconsider what they're planning on doing, because obviously that's something that needs to be done. But we'll send out a description of all of those states where we're going to be working. The usual suspects are there, but we're also going to be expanding our reach, and so we're going to be active in this. I can tell you that we're making great progress in working with members of the legislature and helping them understand the actual story about kratom and set aside the hyperbolic complaints of the Food and Drug Administration, which are based on oh, I don't know, let's quote Dr. Zawar, embarrassingly poor evidence and data. Uh, the the uh, the allies of the FTA that repeat what they say. Those are things that I think we're convincing legislators to see that right now there are three choices. You can ban kratom, and we see a new ban that was just proposed in the state of Washington. And I spoke with the coordinator for the Department of Pharmacy that will be doing that today, and he explained to me the process. And so we've got some time to work on that. He also acknowledged that that complaint was issued by an out-of-state party. So it'll be interesting to see, and eventually we'll know who that is. But we're going to mount an effort to inform that Board of Pharmacy that the rulemaking is inappropriate. We've got a great champion identified in the state legislature there. There was a previous ban effort in the state of Washington by Senator Honeycutt, who is retired then. But even then, when he proposed the ban, he and I had a great conversation, and he acknowledged that he only did it because someone had asked him to. There was a constituent, and when he heard the science, he said that he would not pursue his bill, and he kept his word. And so today we have the opportunity for a KCPA in the state of Washington. That will be one of the states that we're going to be working in. And I'll give you another example. In the state of Montana, Montana meets every other year. 2 years ago, at the last couple of days of the session, the Senate President, Jason Ellsworth, proposed a ban on kratom. And it came out of the blue. We had no idea he was going to do it. He told me that he did it because of a request from a local drug group, and that he thought it was a good idea at the time. And we had to rally quickly. It was expensive to do it, but we managed over the weekend. He proposed this on a Thursday night, stuck it in on a bill that was a must-pass bill, and it got to the House on Monday, and it was defeated 100-0. I had the great opportunity to meet with President Ellsworth at a National Conference of State Legislators leadership meeting 2 weeks ago, and he's committed to be the sponsor for our KCPA. So I think that we're moving the needle in helping people understand exactly where we are on this issue. So we're going to be working hard on that. One of the issues that we are trying to contend with right now is the threat that 7-hydroxymetrogenine products offer to the kratom industry. And make no mistake, a 7-hydroxymetrogenine product is not a kratom product. It should not be labeled as a kratom product. And I am working hard in negotiations with representatives of the 7-OH manufacturers to convince them to stand down from doing that. It is unfair to the kratom community, and it's certainly, they cannot justify from any product formulation standard that a 7-OH product is indeed a kratom product. And unless that product has a majority of the alkaloid content in metrogenine as opposed to the metabolite 7-OH, then I think that we're in real problems there. Now, here's the conundrum we're in. Under federal law, assuming you meet the other criteria for a dietary ingredient or dietary supplement, you have to have a good faith belief in the science showing that your product is safe under the conditions of use. Now, there are many formulations of kratom products on the market today that are only there because of that criteria. If we were to take a position that the only products that should be allowed on the marketplace today under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act are metrogenine-based products and extracts that are properly extracted using FDA-approved solvents to do so as recognized in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. If we took that position, we would eliminate a number of products, including kava kratom products along the way, because the only way a kava kratom product or a kava caffeine product or any other mixture of products that gets on the market is based on that standard at the federal level. Now, my personal opinion is I would like to eliminate them completely, but we can't do that without also putting all these other products at risk. So we have to be consistent. And I think that our goal here would be to create a legal environment at the state level under our KCPAs where 7-hydroxymetrogenine products cannot be identified as kratom products, and then require them under a registration procedure for their products to give sworn statements that they have the requisite required basis for the safe use under the conditions of use, which means that they would have to limit the amount of 7-hydroxymetrogenine in any product that they manufacture and then market. I think that's a step until we can get a federal review of this along the way. And so we're working towards that. Difficult at this point to see how that's going to play out. Our position at the American Kratom Association is clear, despite the nonsense you hear from some of the detractors that we're soft on 7-OH. We follow the law. We're consistent. We're consistent with those people that are making kava kratom products that are our biggest critic. And I can tell you that they're misstating the position that we have. I've described that position clearly. It may not be one everyone likes because I agree that 7-OH is a dangerous product that needs to be regulated properly, or if they can't justify it, needs to be banned. But the same argument exists for those that are manufacturing products that are mixtures that require the same kind of data and scientific data. Many of you may have heard that the state of Utah has delisted, I think, 9 kava kratom products. I can tell you that I had this discussion about mixture of products with J.W. Ross, who is the chairman of the Global Kratom Coalition, several months ago, and about this very issue, about the way that we wanted to frame regulatory language in a KCPA that would accommodate a kava kratom mixture, given the fact that there are critics out there, including scientists, who say that a kava kratom mixture product is adulterated. And the response that I got from Mr. Ross was that, oh, I have the science. I said, well, share it with me so that we can start to educate legislators about this so that they are comfortable with this. And he said flatly, no, I won't give you that. Now, when Utah delists these kava kratom combination products, the Matt Lowe, the executive director of the Global Kratom Coalition, reached out to the American Kratom Association and asked us to join them in appealing the decision at the Utah Department of Agriculture and Foods. How can I do that? I don't have the evidence. And they haughtily denied me the opportunity to see that evidence. And so the AK is not in a position to do that. We can't say we're following the science, which we do religiously, and then say, but we don't care if there's no scientific evidence. Now, there is an outlier here that's important, and that is that a manufacturer of a kava kratom mixture, as an example, and it's true for kava and caffeine and kava and CBD and other things, that you can have market experience data. So if you don't have a peer-reviewed published article yet, and say this, let's theoretically say the science is ongoing, if you can demonstrate long-term market presence in the product formulation under the labeling that you have on your product, and there's been no serious adverse events reported, then you can go on the market. And that if the kava kratom group can do that, great. And I will join them on that level. But if there's science behind it, then they need to present that, because we know that there is a significant body of peer-reviewed published literature on kava itself, showing or representing that there is a safety risk associated with liver toxicity. And there is an equal number of kratom peer-reviewed scientific articles which make the same allegation. And the combination of those two, and whether there's an attenuating effect of those that creates a more dangerous substance, is the unknown factor here that can only be answered with good science and with market data. And so I want to cooperate as best as the AK wants to cooperate, as do I, as best we can, in order to promote these products on the marketplace, assuming that they have this basis for market entry. So little work to be done in this thing, and I know that there's a lot of contention along the way. And I know that people are asking, what is the relationship between the Global Kratom Coalition and the American Kratom Association? I'll answer this clearly for you. The American Kratom Association wanted to work on the California Kratom bill. We wanted it to be a KCPA. The difference between the Global Kratom Coalition and the American Kratom Association is our philosophical approach to what the regulatory model should be. And you don't have to rely on my position on this. The Global Kratom Coalition published a graphic which criticized the American Kratom Association for adopting a self-regulatory scheme for dietary supplements and for kratom, as opposed to their more robust regulatory scheme, which is a drug scheme regulation, because that's the only difference that there is at the federal level and at the state level for regulating dietary supplements. What I mean by that is, and they call it self-regulatory, but that's a little bit of a misnomer. What it means is that when you register a product, either at the federal level or at the state level, and let's say theoretically under the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, you register your product and you then submit a laboratory certificate of analysis as the manufacturer, showing that your product is compliant with the specific provisions that govern the quality and the content of that kratom product. Then your labeling obviously has to comply with whatever the statute is. And then you have the age restriction. So at the federal level, this is the way dietary supplements are regulated. The FDA does not have an army of people that go out and test every dietary supplement. They don't go into stores and look to see whether or not the label on the product is done. They rely upon, as Commissioner Califf recently testified about a month ago in Congress, he said, we're the police. We act on complaints. And so if there is a cluster of adverse event reports that are given on a specific kratom product, then the FDA will act. If they receive complaints about mislabeling or illegal sales to minors, they will react. That is what's called a self-regulatory model. The other side of that is you have a drug-like regulatory scheme, which is embodied in the California bill that was advocated for by the Global Kratom Coalition. That, in my opinion, limited competition, drove out of the marketplace specific products, but then more importantly, it imposed a regulatory scheme that was so expensive to implement. It required the California Department of Health to add hundreds of new staffers. They had to create new laboratory spaces. They had to hire consultants to help them understand what the regulations had to be for kratom, because none of them knew what kratom was or is. And so the cost of that program for implementation, as was presented by the California Senate Appropriations Committee staff, based on input from the California Department of Health, was significant, millions and millions of dollars. Now, they did not understand that there are only about 50 kratom manufacturers who will meet the standards set forth for quality products that are properly labeled and age restricted. That's the number after 4 years of experience in Utah that register. There are 50. So if you, it's simple math, divide 50, and we hired an economist to do it because I was challenged by the Global Kratom Coalition to justify it. We hired an economist, and the economist did the math and said that if you assume 50 registrants, and that's a tough lift, by the way, because the cost would be $111,000 per manufacturer in the first year and $83,000 a year thereafter. That eliminates a significant number of mid-sized and even some of the large kratom manufacturers and all the small ones, because they can't afford those kinds of registration fees. So if you have that situation, how many would actually register? It wouldn't be 50 because the cost is too high. Compare it to Utah, where the cost is $260. Let me repeat that, $260 per registration, as opposed to $113,000 in the first year and $83,000 every year after that. I can do that math. You're pricing out of the marketplace except for a very few kratom manufacturers. That's the math. That's the evidence. And the Global Kratom Coalition can squawk all they want about how they were misunderstood and all that. In fact, they're saying that the reason that the California bill, AB 2365, was held in suspense was because the California Health Department didn't really want to accept that regulatory role. That is not true. I spoke to the California Health Department people. They were perfectly willing to do it. They just wanted to have the money to do what the statute required. So now I understand that the Global Kratom Coalition is going to have a modified bill where they're going to have the Attorney General regulated, and then they're going to contract out for the specific regulatory functions to determine whether the applicants meet the specific requirements to unburden the California Health Department from that obligation. But the cost is going to be the same, maybe even greater, and you're still going to have the same impact on the marketplace. You're still going to eliminate competitive products to the primary product that GKC advocates for, and you're going to have a lack of innovation. You're going to eliminate marketplace. You're going to deprive consumers, and you're going to drive prices through the roof in California. That's not a consumer-friendly bill. So we are prepared and we're ready to do it, to have a Kratom Consumer Protection Act proposed in California that adopts the responsible self-regulation model that really does work. And it's modeled after the federal policy and after a policy that's working in the states. And I have heard the Global Kratom Coalition's argument, and you've all heard it too, where both Matthew Lowe and J.W. Ross say that the states are not effectively regulating kratom. Well, it's kind of ironic that the state of Utah is regulating kratom. They don't like it because it regulated their product. and they're squawking now. But if the states aren't able to regulate and aren't regulating, then why in the world are they now fighting back about their product being delisted in Utah? Proves that the system is working, doesn't it? And it's not the only state where that kind of thing is happening. We think it's an important step. And the most important thing about a state self-regulation model, as is embedded in the Trade and Consumer Protection Act, and this was experienced in Utah, is that you saw a significant improvement in the kinds of products that are being marketed in the state, and you're calling out the bad actors. And that's an important part of the regulation when it's implemented properly in the state. So I think that that's our challenge going forward. I'll tell you one interesting story that adds to, I think, our optimism about next year. Many of you know that the state of Rhode Island, the governor vetoed the Trade and Consumer Protection Act. I had the opportunity to meet with the governor of Rhode Island last Friday. He's a delightful individual. He was candid with me about the reasons that he had actually vetoed the bill, largely upon recommendations of close friends of his who are physicians. And he said to me, if you can get those physicians to accept what you're saying, he said, I'll sign that bill in a hurry. And I said, I'm never going to be able to convince those physicians because they're following the misinformation of the FDA. They're doing it in good faith, but they actually trust the FDA when that trust is unfounded, particularly when it results or as it relates to kratom. But I told him that the American Medical Association House of Delegates considered a resolution proposed by the Mississippi Medical Association that would ban kratom. And instead of adopting that resolution, the AMA adopted a different resolution which said, among other things, kratom should not be criminalized and people should have access to it. And the governor said, well, if that's true, give that to me. And that changes the equation. He invited us to work with his policy staff to make some appropriate changes in the bill. And he thought that we were in a better position to see that bill signed next year. I think that's great because this is a part of the process that we're working on. And I think our efforts are targeted at building consumer access to kratom products. That's what you hear from the American Kratom Association. You're not hearing from us the criticism about other products that are in the marketplace other than 7-OH, which we think has to be regulated. You're not hearing us complaining about product formulations. I routinely get those complaints from some of the detractors here. So I think that people should judge the activity and the actions. Look at what's happening. We're going to Indonesia at the American Kratom Association, bringing scientists to improve the relationship between Indonesian scientists and American scientists. We invited and hosted a delegation of Indonesian scientists to the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. Nora Volko thanked us for doing that. We're helping with an ASEAN task force on kratom that will bring together all of those countries in Asia. We're working proactively. We are going out to the states and advocating for the passage of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We're working with allies in that space and working and outreaching to you. Now, the one thing we don't have is an unlimited amount of money. And I know the Global Kratom Coalition does, and that's a hard thing to compete against. But I hope you'll look at what the success has been, what our performance has been, and where our activities are focused, because we're about consumers, and we're going to continue to be that. We're going to honor the trust that you put into us, and we're going to continue to work hard on that. So I'll stop there. I'll go back to the questions because I know that there are a number here. John asked about New Jersey, and he says his sister relies on kratom for her pain. We're making progress in New Jersey. It is not easy because you have a bill that was put up by a member of the legislature to ban kratom called CJ's Law. And there's a lot there that this representative has not known, but he scheduled a meeting with me in a month, and we're looking forward to that. I think we're going to be better along the way. Let's see. Jeff is back in Indonesia. I agree that the farmers should get at least some of the profit. I've already explained, I think, appropriately what we need to do there. Anonymous attendee, what reason should I keep donating to the AKA and not GKC, who seem more effective at engaging lawmakers that are staunchly against 7-OH products, which are clear money grab? It's not true. You buy in to the narrative that the Global Kratom Coalition is selling, that the American Kratom Association is somehow soft on 7-OH products, and you are buying a lie. And I can tell you that I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't contribute to the Global Kratom Coalition, but I can tell you they don't need your money because they are funded almost entirely by the Botanic Tonics Company. But I can tell you the American Kratom Association has a diverse group of donors. We have industry people that support us, many, many, many. The Global Kratom Coalition has been in business for a year and a half or 2 years, and they have few supporters on that level. They spread their money out widely. I get that. We honor our donors by fighting hard for you, and we're going to continue to do that. And we hope we honor that, and we merit your trust. And the Global Kratom Coalition is what it is, and they're going to continue to fight the battles. I can tell you that if you adopt the regulatory model that the Global Kratom Coalition is advocating for, you will have fewer products on the market, higher prices, less innovation in the marketplace, and you will not have the array of products that are currently available today. And I'm talking about safely manufactured and produced extract products, which are recognized as being safe, as all extract dietary supplement products are, if the conditions of the manufacture of those products are met. And that's the only way that we operate, because we put those restrictions on how you can extract kratom raw materials into extract products. The argument for extracts by those who use them, and they're popular, is because they clear out all the microbial load. There is a standardized dose. There's no question about what levels of metrogenine that you're getting, and that they, depending on some of the products, they're more bioavailable. I respect consumers in this area. I see both sides of it, and I'm not going to come down and say we want to exclude one segment of the marketplace just because it's a competitor to another company, however big that company may be, or however big a footprint they have. We're just not going to do that along the way. Can you weigh in on the Bloomberg article that just came out stating the FDA study finds capsule safe? Well, the Bloomberg article wasn't completely accurate. What that study did, the FDA dose finding study, was conducted with 40 human subjects, designed to see whether or not the kratom could be safely consumed by humans, so that the FDA could then conduct a human abuse potential study. Make no mistake, the FDA did not intend to ever do a human abuse potential study, because they believed, and the clinicians involved in this study reported to me, that the FDA, the people that designed the study, said, we're not going to get to the levels that would demonstrate the safety in order to go to a human abuse potential study. You're going to see serious adverse events at 6 to 8 grams. They started 1 gram. They kept escalating it. They got to the 6 to 8 grams, 8 to 10 grams. They got to 12 grams consumed in a 5-minute period, which means 24 large capsules of kratom material. And they observed nausea in some of the human subjects, both in the placebo group and the kratom group, meaning that when you consume that amount of material, plant material, in a 5-minute period, it's going to make you nauseous. That's all it did. And the FDA then decided, their scientific team decided to stop the study because, and this is important, no serious side events were observed. I made this very point to a Bloomberg reporter today in an interview. That article was a little bit tainted because they said, oh, it didn't include the liquid products and that kind of thing. The bias is clear, and I can tell you that the truth is going to emerge here, because the FDA study is now getting. They promised they're going to publish it. We obviously have the data that was presented at a recent scientific conference. I'm looking forward to that publication. It'll be telling if they don't publish it, because it might tell you a lot about what's going on. Lindsay asked, why is the FDA trying to get kratom off the shelves? They hate all dietary supplements. They hate botanical products. They don't want them on the marketplace. They want them to be new drugs. And it's not just kratom. It's many things. They abuse their powers with kratom. There is one individual in the high levels of the C-suite of the commissioner who is anti-kratom. And until he dies, retires, or gets hired and goes off somewhere, we're stuck with him. And so we're going to have to fight this battle at the legislative level. Hopefully, Commissioner Califf will see the light. I've requested through a letter to him last week that he convene a stakeholders meeting so that we can have a public examination of what the true science on kratom is and what the right public policy ought to be. We'll see if he bites on that. Lindsay asked, is the 7-hydroxymetrogene the more psychoactive part of the kratom leaf? First off, 7-hydroxymetrogene does have a psychoactive effect on the mu opioid receptors. In fact, it binds completely and tightly to the mu opioid receptors where kratom metrogene does not. Metrogene has what's called a partial agonist effect, which means it goes to that sector of the mu opioid receptors in the brain that controls pain. So it gives the analgesic effect and then has some anergergic, I can't even say it, anergergic effects that are helpful for people in terms of mood elevation and that kind of thing. It doesn't give you the euphoric high, and it doesn't go to your respiratory system, where 7-OH, it appears based on scientific evidence, likely does, and so it needs to be examined and treated differently. It is a metabolite, not a constituent alkaloid of the kratom plant, which is why I think the important legal distinction is that 7-hydroxymetrogene products are not kratom, and that's what we want to accomplish in some of this. Lloyd asks, is there any legislation coming up in South Dakota you know of? It was shelved a couple of years ago. I've been assured by legislators there's not going to be any activity on kratom. It's not on our priority list in terms of funding priorities. I can tell you, though, that there have been states where we have not had to hire a single lobbyist. And yet we've seen activity, positive activity, including passage of the KCPA. So if you are a advocate and you want to be our citizen lobbyist, then contact us and we'll talk about that. I think it's important. Brian says, isn't it true that the horse is out of the barn on 7-OH products and consumers are demanding access to 7-OH products that now have a full year track record of 7-OH safety? Yes. But that doesn't negate the responsibility of the 7-OH manufacturers to meet the conditions of use, which means labeling, and demonstrate their safety. There are 7-OH products that are on the marketplace today that are vape products. Now, there's something wrong with that. There are 7-OH products that are outlandishly marketed, appealing to children. And so 7-OH can make their argument, but they've got to be responsible too. And if they want to be on the marketplace, prove that they're by the science that they should be there and by the standards under the law, and self-regulate. Let's see a 7-hydroxy bill, because we're going to include it in our KCPAs in 2025. And I would love to have a section there that requires 7-OH to responsibly regulate their products as 7-OH products, not kratom, and they have to meet the similar standards that we require of kratom manufacturers. I think I've answered the Washington State. If I didn't, and I apologize if I didn't, it's the start of a process. I've engaged with their people this morning, and we're going to be on top of this. It is a very preliminary operation right now, recommended in a petition, which under the law they can do from an out-of-state person. And we have faced this in Virginia, in Ohio, in Nevada, many states, and we've beaten it, and we're going to continue. We're going to be there guns blazing on this issue as well. The Washington champion, I'm going to defer on telling who that individual is, because I don't have his authorization to say. You asked me Marvin asked if I've spoken with Ferguson. I have not. Love to have a contact there. So if Marvin, you'll contact me, send me an email, that'd be great. It's mhatto@americankratom.org. Peter asked, I live in an area where the KCPA has begun. So on some level, the regulation should help, but I'm still in fear of someone passing away from kratom in their system, and my shop getting hit with an 8-figure wrongful death lawsuit because of the climate of the issue. How, as a shop owner, can I protect myself from lawsuits associated with the sale of kratom? Would customers having to sign a waiver be a step too far, or a good way to protect myself and employees? You need to talk to an attorney about some of this. I can tell you that the best defense on a kratom product liabilities lawsuit is make sure you're selling kratom products that are properly labeled. Make sure that the product liability that's associated with that that you're protected by making sure that those products are defensible. Now, that doesn't protect you 100% from a product liability suit, but your defenses have to be a good faith, good notice, and that you're following the law. And I think that you'll be there. But certainly talk to an attorney about how you might be able to do it. We're going to hold a panel discussion at an upcoming leadership summit in November in Providence, Rhode Island, where we're going to talk about how you can shrink the target for a product liability suit for vendors. And I think we should address this for distributors and retail outlets as well. So hopefully we can get that seminar and maybe be able to circulate it after the leadership summit is completed. Nicholas asked, the kratom legalization bill in Wisconsin appears to have enough support in Assembly last year, but it wasn't brought to the floor to a vote. Any idea if they're going to bring it forward next year? Do you know why they never brought it forward this year? I do. The Speaker of the House, Robin Voss, expressed his strong support for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. He insisted that the Controlled Substances Board provide a report to the legislature about whether or not kratom meets the 8 factors which mirror the federal statute, and the Controlled Substances Board did that, and they said it doesn't. They said, but we don't think it should be unregulated, meaning that it needs regulation. And so the Speaker was ready to proceed, and the Democrats came to the floor and said, knowing how important it was to Speaker Voss, and they said, okay, if we're going to do this, we want you to give us some election reform concessions. And the horse trading failed at that level. We're hopeful we're back at it here in January, and that's the bottom line on it. I'll keep you posted as we go forward in Wisconsin. They're good people in Wisconsin, and the legislature probably would have passed it. Hard to tell until you get a final vote, but we were optimistic that was going to happen, except for the battle that went forth on a political issue on election reform, which didn't do it. Jordan gives an endorsement for the AKA. Thank you. And I think you make the right point. There's no point to picking fights among a group of people that should be aligned in the same thing. And I can tell you the AKA ain't picked no fights. We have been attacked, vilified because of our so-called failures. You can judge on what we've done. We've worked hard to do it. We have a team of people that are terrific, and we try to work with advocates as best we can in order to make this happen. Any news about Arkansas? Marshall Price's lawsuit was filed. That's great news. Arkansas is convening a hearing, interim committee hearing before the interim health committee, and that will take place in early October. And we're going to have a team of specialists. This is going to be a presentation on the science and the policy issues. It's not going to be an opportunity for a lot of consumer input, but we'll announce that and let you have the opportunity to obviously observe and participate if it's appropriate. They're not giving us a lot of time, but this is an informational hearing that will then set the stage for the filing of the KCPA in January in Arkansas. In Illinois, Michael, thank you for the question. Just had a meeting with the Illinois Department of Health. It was a great meeting. They candidly said that they're not sure they're the right regulatory body, and they asked us to look at the Department of Revenue and the Department of Agriculture, because unless the product is contaminated with Salmonella E. coli or something like that, they don't have any authority at the Department of Health to remove a product from commercial shelves. So we're going to take that to heart, and we're going to talk with those other agencies about taking it on. But I can tell you that Assistant Majority Floor Leader Evans is a champion. He was on the call with us, and he talked about how important it was to protect his constituents, and he's a marvelous leader, so we're grateful for him. Peter asked, has there been any meaningful updates on the HAP study? Has it gone or has it begun? So the FDA did theoretically bid out the human abuse potential study, and I think they have that done. Now they're in the process of determining what the protocol for the study is. They have to be careful because they know we're watching. And if they come out with a protocol that puts their thumb on the scale or their foot on the scale on this, then we're going to be careful. We have lots of scientists who know this issue. So I think they're being careful. And it has not yet begun, but we'll know when it does, and we'll keep you updated on it. We're going to watch that one closely because it's not that we distrust the FDA, but President Reagan said it right. We trust but verify, and we're going to make sure that we verify as best we can everything that we can do to make sure that they're playing fair and balls and strikes. So we'll continue to work on that, doing our best to take care of that. So I think that's the end of the questions. I'll give you one last chance. Maybe you got a burning question, you can answer it. And while you're thinking about it, let me just say something. And I know it's difficult when it's like any family, when you have a fight going on among family members, there's tension. And I hate this tension that exists between the Global Kratom Coalition and the American Kratom Coalition, because I envisioned a cooperative effort together. And I can tell you unequivocally, we have not picked this fight, but we're not going to knuckle under to demands that are made by groups that, by any group, including the Global Kratom Coalition, where they're inconsistent with our mission and that they favor one product over another, or they favor a non-competitive marketplace that is unjustified based on the science and the conditions in the marketplace. Because my belief, and it's one that the board of the American Kratom Association heartily endorses, is that we should bend over backwards to give consumers as many choices as they can of safe, properly regulated, properly labeled products so that they can decide. And do not let some bureaucrat decide. And for goodness sake, don't let some competitor in the marketplace who has a dominant marketing position and a lot of money to throw around and a personal philosophy about what the product should look like determine what you get to choose in terms of products that you want to purchase and use for your health and well-being. I want to bend and err on the side of giving you that opportunity as long as they meet those conditions that I outlined. So I think that that's our goal. And like any family, we can make up. I hope we can. But it's going to be a fair makeup, not just on conditions that are simply designed to get a settlement as opposed to coming to a fair conclusion, particularly one that protects consumers. And so I pledge to you, and I've been instructed by the board to make sure that we deliver on this promise, that what we do in good faith is going to be to protect the marketplace for consumers, not for individual companies that compete. We look forward to that. There are companies in the marketplace today that I think are great companies. They're not members of the GMP program in the AK program. We wish they would be. We wish everyone would jump on that because we think that's a good consumer safety mechanism. They make good products. They don't necessarily agree with our regulatory philosophy, but they're still good companies and they're good people along the way. And some of them are on this call tonight, and I hope they understand that my commitment and the AKA's commitment is to protect that marketplace for you as well. We encourage voluntary compliance with the GMP program, but we don't require it as a basis for being an AKA company. We're not going to vilify you. We're not going to target you. We want this to be a marketplace that benefits consumers across the board. So I think that's the best way I can say it. I'll end with just the recapitulation about things that you should be looking at. We're going to keep you updated on the Indonesian situation. It's complicated, and there are things that we're working on right now. We have a meeting with a bunch of vendors tomorrow prior to the congressional briefing on Saturday, where we're going to be talking about this and developing strategies. We'll do the best we can to keep up with that. We'll have the congressional briefing not only live streamed on Friday, but also we'll record it so that you can watch it later. I think that'll be fascinating. We're going to update you on new regulatory challenges on the FY25, not FY, it's the 2025 Kratom Consumer Protection Act program. We'll have another webinar that goes into more detail in the states and keep you updated. We'll let you know about the upcoming events that are coming up with the hearings in various states. And we'll make sure you're updated on how we do in Washington State as we proceed with informing them about these issues. And then the last thing I'll tell you, and this is the hardest part, and it kills me in many ways, is that we see the disinformation campaign being effectively disseminated by the FDA using their new surrogates, which are local governments, local police officials, these addiction recovery center people who have a vested financial interest in trying to do local bans. We do as much as we can to fight back against those bans. When I'm available, I go there and testify directly. We put our resources into it. We send a packet of material in every case. We're not winning that battle because we still see more and more of these things pop up, but we're going to continue to fight. We need the help of the local constituents in those areas because inevitably the complaint they get is, well, who are you from Virginia to come and talk to us? And who are these constituents that live outside of our jurisdiction? It's not a fair kind of criticism, by the way, because they're imposing a regulation that doesn't just impact the citizens in their jurisdiction. It has the effect of influencing other communities. And so they ought to be more responsible with the way they do it. But we need your help. We're going to continue to work to earn that trust and inform you as best we can about how things are going. And we're going to continue to work it. Lots of challenges. Facebook, social media, with their current nonsense, where they're trying to when you try to search for kratom things, they say it's a drug and you should be concerned about it. That's all FDA nonsense, and we're fighting back with them as well. So lots of fires to put out, but lots of willing hands to do it. And there can't be a better group than the foxhole that we occupy with you in taking this fight to those people that are anti-kratom. So thank you for all the work that you do, and we'll schedule another webinar here shortly before the beginning of the new legislative session to bring you update on things. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we appreciate it very much.